Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:07 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Good morning, folks. Happy Friday. It is the last Friday of May. We're easing into the weekend, and we've got all of the news and analysis you need to make sense of it all. This is Patrice Onwuka. I'm usually here on Fridays with Larry. He is off celebrating his son's high school graduation. So our good friend Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation, he said, Patrice, let me come on down and help you out this morning. And what perfect timing, because we've got a lot to get to. Good morning, Hans. How are you?
Good morning, Patrice. And, it's always really nice to be in the studio talking with you. I tell you, I enjoy that much more than just calling in on my cell phone from my kitchen table when you guys have me on as a guest.
Well, it's great to have you. You're going to be, your analysis is actually going to be so needed. It's been needed all morning, but particularly as we get into the first subject of this half hour. But let me just tease who we have coming on today. At 6:35, Stephen Stambouli, attorney for Gun Owners of America. He'll be here to talk about the DOJ moving to dismantle Chuck Schumer's 30-year gun ban on offenders. 7:05, Chuck Thies, D.C. political analyst, will be joining us. And then 7:35, Kaylin Deese, from the Justice Department reporter for the Washington Examiner. He'll talk about the House Republicans investigating President Biden's use of the auto pen, or someone's use of the auto pen there. And at 8:05, our good friend and your colleague at Heritage, Steve Moore, to talk about the big, beautiful bill. All right, so let's get into it, Hans. Tariffs. We teased it a little bit earlier, but these nationwide injunctions against, and this time it's about tariffs, but we can apply that to any of the challenges to the Trump administration and President Trump's agenda, from immigration policy to dealing with federal workers. And so, the latest, let's catch everybody up to speed on just where the tariffs are and what's happened. And then I'd love for you to take it and talk about just what we know about these injunctions. So, on Wednesday, a federal court had U.S. Court of International Trade ruled that President Trump had overstepped his authority by making these sweeping tariffs and using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So it seemed as though the tariffs would have to be put on ice. Then yesterday, a federal appeals court temporarily put a hold on that ruling that voided President Trump's tariffs, and now the administration can continue to move forward with the tariffs, some of which are right now under negotiation. There's some deadlines that are fast approaching. A lot of countries are negotiating. And as of last night, I did hear from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on TV that as early as next week, there could be announcements about tariff negotiations that have come to a conclusion for some countries. So, these nationwide injunctions, though, of district courts, of smaller courts, Hans, how ridiculous are these, and just how common have we seen these? According to how many of them are making their way to the Supreme Court?
Well, we've never seen this before. Before 1963, there had never been a nationwide injunction issued.
Wow.
by a court. Since then, I've now almost lost count of how many have been filed, but basically about 170 nationwide injunctions have been issued. Half of those came during the first Trump administration. Almost all the rest are coming in this administration, and almost all of them are being issued by judges who are Democratic nominees, and most of them from just 5 judicial districts. So in other words, what's happening here is judge shopping. The critics of the administration are going to the most left-wing liberal ideologues who they know will rule in their favor, no matter what the law says, no matter what the Constitution says, and that's what they are doing. The Supreme Court, actually, I was counting this up yesterday, they've issued emergency stays, which is also very unusual, which is basically a suspension of a lower court injunction, in case after case after case. It's really just astonishing and they have got to step in, the Supreme Court, to do something about this.
Well, that's important, Hans, because it is the Supreme Court who would be the final arbiters here.
That's right.
To actually put in check these lower court judges who are, overstepping their bounds and, frankly, willingly being used as a tool by the left to engage in what? Policy lawfare. Now,
right.
Previously we saw lawfare against candidate Trump to try to keep him off of the ticket. Now we're seeing policy lawfare. What can we expect from the Supreme Court?
Well, this is now up before them. On May 15th, they heard arguments in the birthright citizenship case. What's interesting was that normally they don't have arguments in cases past April. So they actually scheduled a special day on May 15th to hear arguments, and the arguments weren't about the substantive issue. In other words, is Trump's interpretation of the citizenship clause correct? No, it was about 3 nationwide injunctions issued by the favorite lower court judges of the left in Massachusetts, Maryland, and Washington State. That's exactly right, where you'd expect these kind of actions to occur. The entire argument, 2.5 hours, was about nationwide injunctions and are they proper, improper. So sometime between now and the end of June, when the Supreme Court's term ends, we're going to get an order from the court on, I think, when nationwide injunctions are proper and when they aren't. And I'm hoping they come out with some very hard, restrictive rules that will stop what's going on in these other courts.
I'm glad you said rules, because I would think just guidance is not enough. It seems like for these judges. These judges many of them seem to be politically motivated. And, whether or not they think that they're right, it seems like they would, if the Supreme Court just kind of says, oh, you shouldn't do that, it's not a good idea, that would not be strong enough for them. They need guidelines. So Hans, you're saying that we can expect, I'm guessing you're already drinking a lot of Red Bull in anticipation of whenever the Supreme Court releases the opinions, because we have a number of cases on the docket that we've been tracking from a policy standpoint, but these are also cases around judicial process. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully we will definitely have you on to provide analysis of those cases. Let's just get some readout from President Trump in response to the U.S. Court of International Trade, who tried to stop his tariffs. President Trump wrote on social media, the U.S. Court of International Trade incredibly ruled against the United States of America on desperately needed tariffs. But fortunately, the full 11-judge panel on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit Court has just stayed the order by the Manhattan-based Court of International Trade. Where do these 3 initial judges come from? How is it possible for them to have potentially done such damage to the United States? It is purely a hatred of Trump. What other reason could it be? And he goes on in a very lengthy piece here on social media. But his bottom line is the ruling by the U.S. Court of International Trade is so wrong and so political. Hopefully the Supreme Court will reverse this horrible country-threatening decision quickly and decisively. I think we're looking forward to what the Supreme Court has to say. Do we have any indication, based on how the birthright citizenship case was argued, maybe the questions that the justices were fielded or asked? Was there anything that suggested one justice or another might lean toward one way or another in this case? Because I think Elena Kagan had a lot of things to say about the nationwide injunctions in the past that seems to suggest that she would not that she would want to see them eliminated. Is that right?
Well, yeah, kind of. Look, there's no question that Sotomayor and Brown Jackson, they think there's nothing wrong with this, because their rulings are based on ideology. They can't stand Trump, so they like seeing him stopped. Kagan and her questioning seemed to be trying to find some way to skate between the fact that she didn't like the few nationwide injunctions issued against Biden, but she likes the ones against Trump. So I think she's trying to find some middle road to explain that. Alito and Clarence Thomas obviously think this is a bad idea. Gorsuch has said it's a bad idea. How the other 3 will rule, I have no idea.
All right. Well, we'll have a little bit more on the tariff specifically, but also just nationwide injunctions. It's 6:16.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
All right. So Hans von Spakovsky, as we were just talking about the tariff specifically, but nationwide injunctions broadly, it really speaks to whether the President of the United States can enact any sort of policy if activist judges are just going to tie his hands. Now, this came up yesterday at the White House press conference presser, where Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, fielded a question. Let's play cut 2.
3 judges of the U.S. Court of International Trade disagreed and brazenly abused their judicial power to usurp the authority of President Trump to stop him from carrying out the mandate that the American people gave him. These judges failed to acknowledge that the President of the United States has core foreign affairs powers and authority given to him by Congress to protect the United States economy and national security. Congress had created the National Emergency Act to provide the congressional framework to strike down improper IEEPA use. And any questions over whether President Trump improperly imposed these IEEPA tariffs were already adjudicated in Congress following Liberation Day.
All right, so that was Caroline Leavitt, press secretary, just talking about why, the U.S. International Court, which tried to invalidate the president's U.S. court, why the U.S. International Trade Court tried to stop the tariffs. And she's just explaining, listen, these are powers that the president has. Now, Peter Doocy, Fox News journalist, very intrepid, really asked the pointed question. Let's play this cut.
If the courts are going to be the ones who are shaping policy, does the president wish he would have just become a judge instead?
I think the president would take this job.
So it's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but Hans, I mean, it's an interesting point. And do you think that the Supreme Court will weigh in on this from the perspective of the way that nationwide injunctions put handcuffs on the chief executive when it comes to trying to enact any sort of policy? And again, we've seen these nationwide injunctions not just now on trade, but on immigration policy, on the federal workforce, the president not being able to fire the people who work for him.
Yeah, look, the court has got to act. You know, the Chief Justice came out a while ago and was upset about the criticism being leveled at these judges. Well, if he doesn't want the criticism being leveled at these judges, the Supreme Court has to step in and stop their misbehavior. And it is misbehavior. By the way, on Peter Doocy's questions, I don't know if you saw this, Patrice, but the Babylon Bee did a story not too long ago. It had a great satirical headline that said, basically, President Trump resigns to become more powerful federal judge.
Maybe that's where Peter sourced his question.
Right. And look, I actually think that part of the reason the court may have taken the issue of nationwide injunctions, the birthright citizenship case, is because I think the Chief Justice may have felt stung by a dissent that Justice Alito penned along with Clarence Thomas some weeks ago in a case where they refused to act. And that was the case where you had this judge ordering USAID to pay out $2 billion. And Alito couldn't believe that they had allowed that to go forward. And I think that may have spurred what happened.
Well, we'll be looking forward to how the Supreme Court weighs in. June is just 2 days away, and from that point on, it's going to be a marathon to see how the Supreme Court rules. But hopefully, they will put some real guidelines on these lower courts. It is 6:22. Okay, coming up, we're going to be joined by Gun Owners of America representative to talk about new changes to restore gun rights to offenders. Stay with us. It's O'Connor and Company at 6:30.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station. Making sense of the news. News Talk 105.9. News now. Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:36 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Good morning, folks. Happy Friday. We are easing you into this weekend, this last Friday of May. And this is Patrice Onwuka. You hear me here every Friday with Larry. Larry is off celebrating his son's graduation. So Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation is here with me. Good morning, Hans.
Yeah, good morning, Patrice. Thanks for inviting me in to sit in for Larry.
Absolutely, absolutely. At 7:05, we've got Chuck Thies, D.C. political analyst. 7:35, Kaylin Deese, for a Justice Department reporter for the Washington Examiner. And at 8:05, Steve Moore, your colleague at Heritage and our good friend, to talk about the big, beautiful bill. Right now, though, we're happy to welcome Stephen Stambouli. He's the attorney for the Gun Owners of America, here to talk to us about some potential changes by the Justice Department to restore gun rights to Americans. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Patrice and Hans. How are you all?
We are great. How are you doing this morning?
Doing really, really well. Thank you.
Well, we are delighted to have you here to walk us through what's going on with the Justice Department, reversing a decades-old federal barrier for people who have nonviolent offenders who've been convicted and I guess served their time, but now giving them their right to bear arms. Can you walk us through what this is all about?
Sure. So we got to go back a couple more years than when the Congress defunded this certain provision in the law. But we have this Title 18 USC 925C, which allows the federal government, the Department of Justice specifically, to review someone's federal disability, like a federal felony or something like that, and say that this person is not dangerous, not likely to act in a manner that's going to have anything to do with public safety, and should this person get their gun rights back. Well, Congress, via Chuck Schumer in 1992, defunded the federal government, specifically the ATF, from acting on these applications for federal firearm disability relief. So since 1992, the ATF has not been able to act on any petition, right? So enter Trump and Pam Bondi. They withdrew the delegation to ATF, the defunded agency that cannot act on these petitions, and took it back to Department of Justice, which is what the statute says who is going to do it, the Attorney General. And basically now, Congress has not defunded DOJ from acting on these applications, just the ATF. So it seems like DOJ will be able to go forward with this petition process and allow people to get their rights back, which Gun Owners of America believes is an extremely important thing.
Well, this is so clever. It's so clever. You know, they're not violating the law. They're not violating the Schumer amendment. Although, listen, this was, 92 that Schumer did this, which tells all of us, man, he's been around for just too long.
It's too long.
too long.
100%. 100%. Like, these people have got to go. They get in politics and they just stay forever.
Right. It just sounds really, I got to tell you, this sounds very similar, Stephen, to the pardons process that a lot of states have. You know, in some states, for example, if you've been convicted of a crime and you lose your rights, they usually have a board that made up of folks who look at your application to get all your civil rights restored. And in this case, it's going to be the same thing, except it's going to be Attorney General. You got any idea how many potential applicants are out there who may apply for this?
Wow. I would say hundreds and hundreds of thousands of potential individuals. I mean, I know that we have spoken to, probably 40 in the past week and a half of people that are interested in seeing if they would be a good candidate. And one of the things is, what was your crime? If you have a crime of violence, you're probably not going to be a good candidate for this. Now, that being said, we did have Mel Gibson, who had his gun rights restored, and he was convicted of domestic violence, which, is by its definition a violent crime. So I think that there might be some leeway if you can show, well, this happened 20 years ago. I'm a good person, haven't had any problems with the law since, my conviction, and whatever the case may be. But I think if you have a nonviolent felony or some other type of crime that prohibits you, like adjudicated mental defective, there's a lot of people that have some issues with their mental health when they were minors, let's say, and have been adjudicated mentally defective or something under that statute where they are basically prohibited, a lifetime prohibitor from ever getting their gun rights back. And that doesn't mean that they're dangerous. That just means that they had a problem. And, you shouldn't be banned for life from having a gun because when you were 15, you had some kind of involuntary treatment that you went through because your mom and dad felt something was wrong and needed you to be looked at, right?
What's so ironic about this is that at the very same time, administrations, including the Biden administration in particular, refused to use this statute to restore the Second Amendment rights of nonviolent individuals. The U.S. attorney, for example, in D.C., basically refused to prosecute violent felons who then were violating the law by committing further crimes or being found with guns, which they weren't supposed to have. So it's just kind of ironic, the emphasis that they had on not restoring rights of people who are nonviolent and not going after actual violent felons.
It's the Biden administration. I'm 46 years old. I've lived through some bad presidents. I thought Obama would be a bad president for the Second Amendment, but he was absolutely nothing compared to Biden and what Biden did to the Second Amendment. Not only did he not restore anyone's rights, his Department of Justice actively fought against anyone bringing as-applied challenges to their disabilities in federal court. Prior to us getting this relief from Trump's DOJ, the only way to go about getting your federal rights restored was to sue the federal government in federal court. That process is, number one, not guaranteed because you have to convince a judge, and Biden appointed some horrific judges to the federal bench. I mean, we're going to be dealing with these people for their lifetimes. But beyond that, it was very, very, very difficult. Like, I can't even stress how difficult it was or it is now still, to bring an as-applied challenge to one of these federal laws and then have the Department of Justice fight you and say, no, we have a tradition of banning you from having your gun rights back, even though the Supreme Court told us we have to go back and look at the founding, 1791, when the Second Amendment was ratified, to see if there's a historical tradition of disarming these specific people. So let's say you are a user of marijuana. Would the founders have also disarmed you? Well, the answer is no, because there were no statutes that disarmed people on a lifetime basis for being intoxicated. We do have some statutes from that time period saying, well, they could disarm you at the point of intoxication, but not before and not after. And so we had to fight that. And I mean, it's really fascinating how much Biden's government did not want anyone to have guns.
Wow. Well, thankfully, there's a new administration, a new sheriff in town, so to speak. We have to leave it there, Stephen. Stephen Stambouli, attorney for Gun Owners of America. Thank you so much. It looks like folks can file public comments online. Is that correct? Or they can go to your website and find out details about this case. Is that correct?
They can. They can go to Gun Owners of America's website, and they can also file comments to this petition process by June 18th.
Terrific. June 18, folks. Thank you so much, Stephen.
WMAL, making sense of the forecast. Because you never know what Mother Nature has in store. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
So, Hans, as we continue kind of this talk around the criminal justice system, we had some news this week about pardons that President Trump made. Two in particular are very well known because they are former TV reality stars, Todd and Julie Crisley. I'm an avid fan of their show, their TV show, Crisley. The Crisleys Know Best. They were a kind of a Southern couple raising kids. You know, the family life. They did lead a very extravagant lifestyle. And we always kind of wondered how they afforded all of these expensive trips and fashions that they would wear on the show. But unfortunately, they were, both Todd and his wife, Julie, they were indicted and convicted 3 years ago of bank fraud and tax evasion. Their oldest daughter, she has been very involved with the criminal justice reform efforts, and Savannah Chrisley, she really worked closely with one woman who became kind of the face of President Trump's first term for criminal justice reform, Alice Marie Johnson. I got to know her actually pretty well in a previous work life, but in all of Savannah's efforts, she was able to work with Alice Johnson and everyone in the White House to secure the release and the pardon of her parents this week. And so they were both released on Wednesday. They're expected to be back on TV. They are made for TV. They are reality stars, Hans. Right. But, what do you make of the difference between the pardons we're seeing out of the Trump administration and the last-minute pardons out of the Biden administration?
Well, we've seen very few. I mean, Trump has issued pardons, but we've seen very few. They don't come anywhere close to comparing to the huge number of pardons and commutations that Biden issued. Well, somebody in the White House issued, because they may have been signed with an auto pen. And his were he commuted the sentences of murderers on death row and pardoned drug dealers and all these individuals who really didn't deserve a pardon. I don't know the merits of this particular case, but pardoning these folks in a tax evasion charge, well, Joe Biden pardoned his son.
Thank you.
In a tax evasion charge. So
exactly.
I still think anybody who wants to criticize this president for these kind of pardons, they should look at what the prior president did. What the Biden did was much, much worse and often undeserved.
Exactly. One of the other big pardons also was a rapper NBA young boy who was sentenced on a gun charge. In any case, we'll have more. We'll talk more about these pardons and criminal justice reform in general. Stay with us at 6:52.